His name was Robert, 53 years old, a veteran, and homeless for 6 years. On November 3rd, 1977, he did something out of desperation. He spent his final $8 on a ticket to The Tonight Show. Not because he admired Johnny Carson, but because, for a couple of hours, he wanted to sit somewhere warm, in a place filled with laughter, kindness, and life. A place where no one would yell at him or look past him as if he didn't exist. He just wanted to feel human again. Robert never intended to draw attention. He found a seat in the back and tried to blend into the crowd. But halfway through the show, a camera swept across the audience and captured something no one expected. A homeless man with tears streaming down his face, watching Johnny Carson as if he were watching hope itself. Johnny noticed it on the studio monitor. He saw Robert, saw the pain in his eyes, and, in that instant, made a decision that broke every network rule. It would cost NBC thousands in production delays and defy every policy in the book. Yet, it proved something powerful. Sometimes, the most meaningful act is to pause everything and truly see someone who has been unseen for far too long. It was Thursday night, November 3rd, 1977, in Burbank, California. The Tonight Show was in full swing. Johnny Carson was at his best. The jokes landed perfectly, the crowd roared, and the set ran smoothly. Meanwhile, Robert Mitchell sat quietly in row 12, seat 7, as far back as possible, trying not to be noticed. That morning, he had showered at a shelter, wearing the cleanest clothes he could find, a donated suit jacket that didn't quite fit, pants that were a bit short, and shoes with holes carefully hidden. He had spent 3 weeks saving for that ticket, $8 scraped together from strangers who mostly looked away. The ticket wasn't about meeting celebrities or hearing jokes. It was something much simpler. Robert just wanted warmth, a clean space, and laughter instead of shouting. For those 2 hours, he wanted to remember what life used to feel like. Robert Mitchell hadn't always been homeless. 6 years earlier, Robert had been a completely different man. He was a Vietnam veteran, 2 tours, medals, and wounds no one could see. At the time, PTSD wasn't widely recognized. The VA labeled it adjustment issues and prescribed medication that offered little relief. He tried to rebuild his life, got married, found a job at a factory, but the nightmares only grew worse. Flashbacks began intruding into his days. He'd be on the job, and suddenly he was back in the jungle, reliving moments he wanted to forget. His wife eventually left, unable to watch him unravel. The factory dismissed him after too many missed shifts. When the prescriptions ran out, he couldn't afford refills. His decline happened quickly, faster than most could imagine. First the job, then the apartment, the car, and finally his family. Before long, Robert was sleeping beneath a freeway overpass, his rolled-up jacket serving as a pillow. 6 years passed like that, 6 years of being unseen. People would look right through him, store owners told him to move along, and children sometimes threw things at him. Police would wake him at night, telling him he couldn't stay there, even though he had nowhere else to go. The hardest part wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was the invisibility, the feeling of no longer being a person, but a problem others avoided. Then came November 3rd, 1977, the night Robert decided to feel human again. Getting into the Tonight Show studio was easier than he expected. He had cleaned up as best he could and waited in line with the other ticket holders. The security guard barely noticed him. Once inside, the studio was everything he hoped for, warm, bright, and spotless. The seats were soft, and the air carried the scent of hairspray and coffee instead of exhaust and garbage. Robert took his seat and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: relief. The show began. Johnny Carson walked onto the stage. The audience erupted in applause, and for the first time in 6 years, Robert felt like just another person in a crowd. Not a homeless man, not a veteran, not someone to be avoided. Simply a face among others watching a show. He didn't even realize he was crying until the woman next to him quietly moved her purse away. That's when it hit him. He still looked different. He still smelled different. The shower hadn't erased the years on the street, and the borrowed suit didn't quite fit. The people around him could tell he didn't belong. Robert tried to make himself smaller, hoping to fade back into the background. But the tears wouldn't stop. Not out of sadness, but from the rare comfort of being warm, safe, and almost human again, even if just for a little while. About 30 minutes into the show, Johnny was interviewing an actress Robert didn't recognize, telling jokes, keeping the audience laughing. Camera 2 began its usual slow pan across the crowd, standard routine, showing people smiling and enjoying themselves, helping viewers at home feel part of the moment. But when the camera reached row 12, the operator paused. There was a man crying, not out of joy, but with deep, aching tears. A man who seemed out of place, yet completely absorbed in what he was watching. In the control room, the director noticed and switched to that shot, letting it stay on screen for a few seconds. Johnny, who was known for glancing at the monitors even while talking to guests, saw it too. He saw Robert and really noticed him. Johnny suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence. The actress looked puzzled, and Ed McMahon glanced over in concern. "Excuse me for just a second," Johnny said, turning to his guest. Then, to everyone's surprise, he stood up and walked off the stage. The audience fell silent, unsure what was happening. The actress was confused. The NBC staff in the control room were stunned. Johnny walked up the steps toward the audience, straight to row 12, and sat down beside Robert. "Hey there," Johnny said softly. "You okay?" Robert couldn't speak. He couldn't believe Johnny Carson was sitting next to him, speaking to him like an equal. "What's your name?" Johnny asked. "Robert," he managed to say. "Robert Mitchell." "Robert, good name," Johnny replied. "You a veteran, Robert?" Robert nodded. "Vietnam. 2 tours." Johnny nodded slowly. "Thank you for your service." 5 simple words. Words Robert hadn't heard in years, made him cry even harder. The audience was completely silent. The cameras had found them, and nearly 18 million people were watching this moment live. Johnny leaned in slightly, his voice calm and kind. "Can I ask you something, Robert? What brings you to the show tonight?" Robert tried to answer. Robert tried to explain why he had spent his last $8 on a ticket, why he just wanted to sit somewhere warm, surrounded by people who were happy. I wanted to feel normal again," Robert said quietly, "even if only for a little while." Johnny looked at him, really looked. He saw the worn clothes, the tired face, the eyes that had seen more than most could imagine. "You are normal, Robert," Johnny said gently. "You're a man who served his country and who's having a tough time. That's as normal as it gets." Then Johnny did something no one expected. He stood up and offered his hand. "Come on," he said. "Sit with me on stage for a minute." He led Robert onto the Tonight Show stage, in front of the cameras, the audience, and nearly 18 million people watching at home. In the control room, NBC executives were in disbelief. This wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't part of the show. A homeless man was now on their stage. To them, it was chaos, but Johnny didn't care. He seated Robert on the couch where movie stars and world leaders usually sat, the same place where famous guests shared their stories. And then Johnny began talking to Robert Mitchell as if he were the most important guest of the night. "Tell me about Vietnam," Johnny said. At first, Robert spoke hesitantly, but soon his words began to flow. He talked about the war, returning home, the struggle to fit back into society, and how everything slowly fell apart. Johnny listened, truly listened, asking questions with care and treating Robert with the same respect he gave any guest. "Where are you staying now?" Johnny asked. "Wherever I can," Robert answered. "Mostly under the freeway." "That's not right," Johnny said firmly. "That's not how we should treat our veterans." The audience erupted in applause, not the usual kind of applause meant for entertainment, but something genuine. People were moved because they were witnessing something rare, an honest exchange between 2 human beings. No pretense, no performance. 8 minutes. That's how long Robert sat on stage. 8 minutes that cost NBC thousands in lost airtime. 8 minutes that broke every television rule. And 8 minutes that changed Robert's life forever. When the show cut to a commercial break, Johnny kept talking to Robert privately. "Robert, I want you to stay after the show," Johnny said. "We're going to figure this out." And he meant it. After the taping ended, Johnny brought Robert to his dressing room, called his assistant, and began making phone calls. Within an hour, he had arranged for Robert to stay in a comfortable hotel with a real bed, a shower, and clean clothes. But Johnny didn't stop there. He reached out to the VA directly, using his influence to bypass the usual bureaucracy. He made sure Robert was enrolled in programs he'd been unable to access for years: mental health treatment, job training, and housing support. Johnny quietly covered the costs himself. He never mentioned it to the media or turned it into a publicity story. He simply helped someone who needed help. "I'm not doing you a favor," Johnny told him that night. "I'm doing what should have been done 6 years ago." When The Tonight Show episode aired, NBC couldn't edit out Robert's appearance. It had happened live, and the public's reaction was enormous. The network's phone lines were flooded with thousands of calls from viewers wanting to help. Charities, veterans organizations, and everyday people reached out, inspired by what they had witnessed. For a short time, Robert became a symbol, not of homelessness, but of humanity. A reminder that seeing and acknowledging another person can change everything. Most importantly, Robert received real help. The VA programs Johnny had arranged worked. His PTSD was treated, the job training led to steady work, and within 6 months, Robert had a home, a job, and stability again. He stayed in touch with Johnny for the next 20 years, sending him a letter every Christmas. Not just to thank him for the help, but for something even more meaningful, for seeing him when no one else did. For treating him like a human being when the rest of the world had decided he wasn't worth noticing. That night changed Johnny, too. After meeting Robert, he began paying closer attention to the people around him, not just his guests, but the audience, crew, and everyone who made the show possible yet rarely received acknowledgement. He also began using his platform in a new way. Quietly, without seeking attention, Johnny started bringing awareness to issues like veterans care, homelessness, and mental health. Years later, when someone asked Johnny about the Robert Mitchell episode, why he stopped the show, why he took the risk, his response was simple. Because he was there, and he needed to be seen. And I had the ability to see him. What else was I supposed to do? Robert Mitchell lived another 30 years after that night in November. He remarried, became a grandfather, and worked as a counselor helping other veterans navigate the VA system. He never forgot what Johnny had done, not the financial help or the connections, but the simple act of sitting beside him and asking his name. "Johnny gave me my life back," Robert said in an interview years later. "Not because he gave me a job or a place to live, but because he reminded me that I was worth talking to, that I mattered. When you're homeless, you forget that. You start believing you're invisible. Johnny proved I wasn't." Johnny Carson passed away in 2005. Robert was too ill to attend the funeral, but he sent a letter that was read aloud during the service. The letter was read at Johnny's memorial service. It said, "Johnny Carson stopped his show for me when no one else would even stop long enough to say hello. He saw me when I felt invisible. He treated me like I mattered, even when I didn't believe that myself. He saved my life, not because he had to, but because he believed that's what people are supposed to do for one another." Here's what most people overlook about November 3rd, 1977. It wasn't remarkable simply because a famous person helped a homeless man. Wealthy individuals help those in need all the time, sometimes sincerely, sometimes for attention. What made that night different was that Johnny stopped everything. In the middle of a live broadcast watched by millions, with cameras rolling, schedules to keep, and executives panicking, he paused, walked into the audience, and sat beside a man everyone else had ignored. He talked to him like he was worth listening to. That's the real message. Not the charity that followed, but the simple, human act of acknowledging someone's presence. We live in a world where people go unseen every day. The homeless person on the street, the janitor cleaning late at night, the server bringing your meal. We often look past them, around them, or through them, too busy with our own lives to notice theirs. That night, Robert Mitchell reminded Johnny Carson, and all of us, of something profound. Being truly seen, not just glanced at, is one of the greatest gifts one human can offer another. It doesn't require money, fame, or influence. It only requires a moment to stop, to look, and to ask someone's name. Robert spent his last $8 just to feel human again. Johnny gave him that feeling, and more, by treating him as if he mattered. Robert Mitchell passed away in 2007, 2 years after Johnny. His obituary spoke of his military service, his work helping veterans, and his family. But its opening line read, "Robert Mitchell, the man Johnny Carson stopped The Tonight Show for, passed away peacefully." That became his legacy, not his homelessness, not his hardships, but the moment someone chose to see him. And Johnny's legacy wasn't only in decades of laughter or thousands of interviews. It was also in an 8-minute conversation with a homeless veteran that showed America what it truly means to see another person. Sometimes, the most meaningful thing you can do is pause, look up, and recognize that the person in front of you matters. Robert needed to be seen. Johnny chose to see him. And for 8 unforgettable minutes on national television, they reminded us all what humanity really looks like. If this story touched you, consider subscribing to the channel. Share it with someone who needs to remember that every person has value. Comment below about a time someone noticed you when you felt invisible, or when you took the time to notice someone else. Turn on notifications for more stories that remind us of what it means to be human. Because at the end of the day, we're all searching for the same things Robert sought that night: to be warm, to be safe, and to be seen.